Right, so welcome back to Customer Marketing Catch Up. Today we are in London at the wonderful Customer Marketing Summit on day 2. And I have the wonderful pleasure of talking to Nisha. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing very well. How have you been finding the event so far?
I've loved it.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic. As a customer marketing professional myself, I mean, nothing gives me more excitement to be surrounded by other customer marketing experts. So lots of opportunities to learn and be inspired.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess to kind of start off this conversation a little bit, why don't you, for the listeners at home, just tell us a little bit kind of about who you are, what your job is, and kind of how that relates to customer marketing?
Yeah, sure. So I am at Salesforce, and I currently lead our customer marketing function for Salesforce EMEA across our financial services customers. Really exciting job, and I love working with really a varied set of customers on a day in and day out basis. I've been in customer marketing for about 11 years now, so really enjoy the function and really just enjoy working with, like I said, with different customers on a day-to-day basis. And prior to customer marketing, I was in sales for about 5 years. So I've sort of seen both sides of sales and marketing.
Yeah. Cool. So it's interesting how those two kind of relate to each other as
Absolutely,
well.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess today we're going to be talking a little bit about customer stories. You recently, this morning even, did a talk on the kind of secrets to compelling customer stories and things like that. So I guess my first question is kind of, I took the tag of Salesforce from LinkedIn, which is meet the top brands who are transforming the customer experience with Salesforce. And so really good tag, but how does customer stories kind of relate to that statement and that kind of Salesforce value?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think it begins with the values of the organization and the values that we live by. And customer storytelling is such an intrinsic part of the Salesforce ethos. We truly believe that our customers' success is something to be celebrated, and to really be thankful for their business and the business that they do with Salesforce. So when it comes to customer storytelling, we think of this as really a function that is across the business. Customer storytelling is not limited to a certain function or a certain region. So we think about customer stories at events, customer stories, to support assets, to support demand generation, to support our website, to support new product launches. And so customer storytelling is really the currency in which we want to be celebrating our customer successes.
Yeah, it's such a good thing as well to kind of separate out customer stories through each kind of function as well. It must be incredibly valuable in terms of if you've got a customer that's been with you for 5 years but hasn't delved into your assets and then finds a customer story about them, it's a very good kind of connection to that. And I guess kind of delving in a little bit more with that, how and kind of where do you present your customer stories? You've sat down with your customer, you've had a conversation with them about how they found the event or how they found kind of your product. Mm-hmm. How do you use that kind of story? Do you kind of put it up on LinkedIn, put it as a blog post? What kind of things do you do?
Yeah, no, great question. So it begins with thinking about amplifying customer stories almost in a life cycle, long term. So our approach to customer storytelling is never quick hit. It's never a one and done approach. So we think about customer storytelling and amplifying customer stories really over a long-term plan. And by that, what I mean is we have different activations in which we tell our customer stories. And as I mentioned before, that could be at an event, that could be on the website, that could be via social media, that could be via PR, and that could be via content like ebooks. And so to think about telling a customer story is to be able to create that drumbeat where you're telling the customer story in different activations and in different formats and in different points in time, throughout the year, throughout the life cycle. So our approach to customer storytelling is really to think about telling the story over a long period of time. Obviously, the website is a key activation for us. So all our customer stories are published on our website. We absolutely love to then promote the story on our social media channels as well. And a key part of our approach to amplifying stories is getting the customer along with the journey as well. So we love to have our customers reshare and repost, because at the end of the day, we are talking about joint successes. We're talking about what we've achieved together, and we're celebrating the partnership. And so we really love for our customers to reshare and repost, and oftentimes their own PR and media organizations will be happy to do so as well. So really the approach is to think about this quite holistically.
Yeah. So because that kind of value of being able to connect to customers in that sense, I think it is absolutely, really, really good to do. If you have that kind of relationship with customers where they're very, they've had this good, long-lasting relationship with you, you're going to get better and better stories out of them as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also it shows that we value their relationship, over a long period of time. So with customers, when we tell their story, we always talk about the story is not static but dynamic, because as the customer is innovating, and as they're working on sort of more projects with Salesforce, more use cases with Salesforce, their story is evolving. And so when we're approaching a customer story, we never believe that it is a single story in a single point of time. And so by getting the customer on the journey with you and thinking about how their story is evolving, you really build very trusted relationships, and they're willing to partner with you further as well.
Yeah, it's like not just a very typical narrative, I guess, beginning, middle and end. You kind of can't think of it in that kind of way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess kind of delving into that, you're somebody that has a lot of experience with customer stories and things like that. So out of kind of the strategies and the tips that you talked about during your talk, what would you say are like the one or two very, very key things that you would kind of not want to forego if you only had to pick two?
That's a hard one. Can I pick 100? Yeah. Well, if I were to think about some of the top ones, I would say authenticity. Really, really, really important to approach a customer story from the get-go with authenticity. And I know authenticity is used quite often when you talk about customer stories, but if I were to unpack that a little bit, with authenticity, what I mean is really think about the purpose of that story to begin with. What is the story meant to be doing to your audience? How is it meant to be connecting to your audience? If you put yourself in your audience shoes, what is the authentic story that you can tell that's really going to resonate with your audience? So that begins even before you're working with a customer. Be authentic in what value you want to be giving your audience. The second part around authenticity is, don't forget, it's the customer story. They're sharing their story with you, they're sharing their brand, they're sharing their innovation. Yeah. Very important to make sure the customer's voice is represented in the story. Make the customer the hero of your story. And you can balance authenticity with the right messaging to create the best impact. Yeah. So while you do want to make sure the customer's voice is represented in the story, by having the right message on what your product or service has done to impact the customer, to positively benefit their business strategy, to positively benefit their business outcomes, all of that is part of being authentic. So I would say really think about authenticity both in the way you would want to approach your story to your audience, as well as being authentic to the customer's voice. And the second part, I would say, around customer storytelling and customer stories is really think about amplification from the get-go.
Okay.
So oftentimes you would find, stories take 4 months, 5 months maybe to create. And there's a lot of excitement when the story is ready to be published, and there's celebrations all around. But what happens after that? Where does the story travel? So a really important part of storytelling is to think about your amplification strategy even before you've started drafting the story or writing the story. Think about how can your story travel? Can the story be part of a demand generation campaign? Can the story be part of an ebook? Can the story be told at an event? Can the story be told 6 months down the line, but from a different angle because the customer story has evolved? How do you amplify the story on social media? Have you thought about your customers re-amplifying the story from their channels as well? So the amplification strategy is really important to make the story travel and to have that evergreen drumbeat on celebrating the story that you've created, because the innovation is not going to expire. The thought leadership is not going to expire. So don't think of a customer story as a quick hit, but more a long-term play.
Yeah. I mean, because it's very interesting, because I was talking to a guest just before now about how important it is to kind of make sure that you're connecting with your customers in the way that they want them to. So, if you're writing a customer story and you write it out as a blog format, put it up on the blog, you maybe share it on LinkedIn, you're maybe getting like less than half of the people that you want to see that story. And because people kind of consume media and consume stories in different ways. Would you say? Yeah,
definitely. And I think again, part of your planning should be the format. Right. And again, I'm not saying there's a one size fits all. Every organization is unique, their proposition is unique, their audience is unique. So take the time to think about what is the best format in which your customer story is going to resonate with your audience. I think safe to say that attention spans these days are really hard for people with technology and social media, and people are coming across so much content on a day-to-day basis. How do you break through the clutter? So really thinking about being succinct with your messaging, thinking about, again, going back to what is the value that your audience is going to get out of the story. How can you come to certain key inspirational takeaways? How can you get your audience to take action? And even if that action is for them to go back to your website and maybe land on a product page. So thinking about the format is really important, keeping your audience in mind as well.
Yeah. So I guess kind of leading on from that, we've hit on some really, really key parts that are vital to kind of create customer stories that work really well. But what would you say are like some very common kind of pitfalls, I guess, that maybe you see happen quite a lot, even if somebody's got like a good kind of amount of customer stories or like a good longevity of customer stories? What are the kind of like pitfalls that you sometimes find when people are creating these stories?
Yeah, that's a good question. The most common one is, I find, where customer stories are written almost like a sales pitch. So, it is all about the product, or it's all about the service that the organization provides. It's all about, essentially, like I said, it reads like a sales pitch. And that is never going to be, well received, because I think audiences are really looking, again, going back to my point around authenticity, right? How is this piece of storytelling inspiring me? Even if it's one thing that I've taken away from the story that I'm going to go back and discuss within my organization. So the most common pitfall is approaching the story from your own internal, corporate narrative standpoint is, to me, an absolute no-no. The second one would be, again, not not thinking about the story from a customer's voice. Really think about what has your product or service done to benefit the customer, but that narrative needs to come from the customer. And we talk about doing stories with satisfied customers. I would say, think about champions. Think about your customers as your champions. They're your cheerleaders because they've used your product or they've used your service and they've found success.
Yeah.
And that authenticity of the success that they've found with your organization needs to come through in a story. So don't approach a story by trying to write it out yourself. Get the customer on the journey, have them talk about successes in their own words, and the authenticity will come through.
Yeah, I think that's great, because there must be like a kind of common pitfall in terms of if you're thinking about stories from a purely functional perspective, if we get this customer story, we can put this many quotes up, we can put this many things, I can meet this quota for the day. You kind of like, you lose that kind of authenticity when you kind of have that kind of very almost narrow focus, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I'm going to be cheeky and add a third pitfall.
Go ahead, yeah.
Which is, the why.
Okay.
Not being clear as to why we're doing the story in the first place. Is the story meant to fill a use case gap? Is the story meant to fill an industry gap? Is it meant to fill a regional gap? So oftentimes, you want to do a story for the sake of doing a story, but what is the point of doing that if it's not going to be, leveraged by your sales organization, or it's not going to be leveraged or your audience is not able to find value in the story.
Yeah.
So, again, just kind of summarizing the pitfalls, I would really say, be authentic, really think about bringing in the customer's voice into the story. Don't think about the story as a sales pitch. Don't write the story in your corporate narrative, because your audience will see through that. And then number 3 is don't do a story for the sake of doing the story. Think about the why you're doing the story. What's the purpose of that story? What gap is it going to help you fill? And that's going to definitely resonate with your audience.
Yeah. All right, some absolutely fantastic kind of thoughts to come away from
glad.
this conversation. Yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And
pleasure.
I'll let you get back to the event. We've got lunch kind of coming out
yes.
as well. So well, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure. Good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you, and you too.